telephone call from a friend. This friend, Sue Mosteller, is a nun. She is a nun with the Order of St. Joseph. And she, for many years, decades in fact, had been the director of the L'Arche community outside of Toronto, Canada. For those of you who are not familiar with L'Arche, L'Arche was founded by Jean Vanier, whose father was a high-ranking premier of Canada a number of years ago, almost 50 years ago. And Jean saw the problem with people who were mentally handicapped and persons who had largely been abandoned. And so he began communities, first in Canada, and then in France, and then around the world, called L'Arche. The L'Arche communities invite people who may or may not have families, may be institutionalized until a certain time, invite them into community, and there they live with persons who help them, persons who live in community, they have jobs, they worship together, they eat together, they celebrate the Eucharist together a few times during the week. So Sue had been with L'Arche for many years, and Sue had invited Henry Nouwen, who was a professor at Yale and also then at Harvard, to come to L'Arche. And it was a very different type of experience he had from being a professor at Yale and Harvard to going to the L'Arche community, where people couldn't even read books that he had written. And he was her pastor for 10 years before he died. And it was through my connection with Henry Nouwen that I came to know Sue Mosteller. And Sue was on the phone asking me to come to a retreat during Lent a few years ago. Of course, I had to say that, well, this is Lent and I can't come, Sue. And she said, what do you mean you can't come? And I said, no, but I can't. You know, ministers are very busy during Lent, and they're busy anyway, but during Lent it's just, well, why can't you come? You need to go on retreat too. I'm leading a retreat, and leading with another person, and there are going to be a lot of people from L'Arche at the retreat from all over Canada. You should come. I can't come. I'll spend some time with you and speak with you. If you come, I'll come. And so I rearranged my schedule and headed out to L'Arche a few weeks later. It was the Monday before Palm Sunday that I went to L'Arche. I arrived a day late. Was picked up at the airport by Sue and by a friend of hers, Sister Marie, also a member of St. Joseph Community. We drove to the retreat center, and that night the co-officiant, Bill, was leading, and so we enjoyed some spiritual songs which were led by another L'Arche member from Nova Scotia, and then we listened to Bill as he did some reflecting, and then we retired to our rooms. The next morning, Tuesday morning, I got up early and I took a look at the schedule, and it seemed to be absolutely perfect. The days were well ordered as I had expected. 7 to 8 o'clock silent prayer in the chapel, 8 to 8:30 breakfast, 9:15 reflections by the leaders in the chapel, 9:30 open, 11:30 liturgy in the chapel, 12:30 lunch, 1:15 reflections by leaders in the chapel, 1:30 open, 4:30 liturgy in the chapel, 5:30 dinners, and reflections by the leaders in the evening, then silence and prayer. Sounds simple, straightforward, looked fine, well ordered. The theme of the week was the treasure within. We were to explore our inner lives, to look inwardly, go deeply into the well of our experience, in a more profound way seek God. And that sounded great. Stories from Scripture focused on Jesus, welcoming us, asking us to go deeper into our lives, to discover His presence beautifully. So much to explore, to speak about. This would be a wonderful retreat. But I hadn't read the fine print. I had skimmed over the information after I had signed up and registered, placed the information that I had received in a folder, put the folder under my arm on my way out the door to the airport to go to Albany, didn't look at it while I was in the plane, got off in Toronto, still hadn't looked at it, and here it was on Tuesday morning, and I was looking at it for the first time, and I was, well, not even looking at it then. It was Tuesday morning, I was now at breakfast, and it was the first full day for me of the retreat, and guess what? Nobody was speaking. This was a silent retreat. No talking, no noise. S-I-L-E-N-T. People from all over Canada, and no one was saying anything. There were going to be a few spiritual songs. We would say the Lord's Prayer together, and that was it. I had not expected, "Be still," says the scripture, "and know that I am God." As William Bendix used to deadpan in The Life of Riley, "What a revolting development this is." I was dumbfounded. And actually, I guess that was the point. I was supposed to be speechless. Frankly, I had never experienced anything like this. And I was thinking, if I had known this was a silent retreat, I wouldn't have come here. Ah, but hope. Sue had said that she was going to spend some time with me. And you know, Sue had been the spiritual director for Henry Nouwen, so if she could give me some spiritual direction, that would be great. So I was looking forward to speaking with Sue. And yet when I met with Sue for the first time, she said, "Well, good luck, Steve. You're going to have a long time of prayer this week. It's going to be really good for you." Oh boy, what was she thinking? It was already quiet enough as it was. Now, you may have gotten the point that quietness has not generally been a really major part of my life, or wasn't at that point. I pray throughout the day, but my prayer life is something like, I will stop and I'll think about someone on my prayer list and I'll pray for them. Or I will stop and I will give thanks to God because I'm just grateful. Or I'll stop and I'll say a prayer for someone that I'm thinking of, and I'll go through the day like that. But I don't spend hours and hours sitting down in a monastic way and praying. I pray by myself for extended periods, but that's never been easy. And I've been in prayer groups, and I've been very uplifted by prayer groups over the years, and found them most edifying. But, you know, I can also find myself starting to pray and fall asleep. I'm really like one of the disciples that way, you know. Jesus said, "Will you pray with me?" And they fell asleep. Well, that's more the way I am. So I also find that praying is difficult because I get distracted. I don't know about you. If you start to pray and you really start to pray, you become preoccupied. You become sidetracked. You know, you're trying to listen to the voice of God, but there are all these other voices that are sort of coming in. Henry Nouwen said, we are so preoccupied and sidetracked that we hear all these other voices are like monkeys in a banana tree, and closing in around our heads. And truth be told, those monkeys were certainly alive and well, making a terrible commotion as I sat in my little room at Loyola House and tried to pray. My only sense of noise, I think, was in my own head that week. I can tell you that I was happy the first day when we broke for lunch, just so I could do something meaningful, eat. And in the afternoon, I took a different tact. I read the scripture to try to meditate on it. Naturally, because I couldn't help myself, I was thinking about the weekend and Palm Sunday, and having not yet written my sermon, I needed to write it, and so I started thinking about what I would write. So I decided that I would read the gospel passage that you just heard on Jesus' triumphant entry into Jerusalem and reflect upon that. I thought about the following. What was so triumphant about Jesus' entry? He was, after all, going to his death, which he knew and had predicted. And so Sue Mosteller had even said that Jesus could have taken the Jerusalem bypass. It was true, he didn't have to go to Jerusalem to observe the Passover. He could have done it back in Galilee. He could have done it in Bethany, wherever he wanted to go. Tuesday, for me, ended in silence. Wednesday wasn't a great day either. Felt myself a little edgy, a little angry. I was trying to go more deeply into prayer with little success, which made me more anxious. I couldn't connect very well with the Spirit. That afternoon, I related to Sue my frustration. She advised me to stay with it, to keep on trying to be silent, to be prayerful, to be meditative, to go deeply in. I can't say for sure whether it was just part of my desire to find distractions, but I did begin to recognize people and notice them a little bit better than I had been doing. I saw these people. They were people from large communities around Canada. And I wondered about them. What were their lives like? I knew people who worked at L'Arche. I knew some of the people who had devoted their lives to service of people who had serious needs. I asked myself about their stories. What were they thinking? What were they praying about? Were they having as difficult a time being quiet as I was? I went to bed thinking of Jesus going to Jerusalem and the noisy crowds that lined the streets. On Thursday, I got into a rhythm. The silence seemed to become more of a friend. I found myself not being distracted by all the things that I needed to get done or should be doing. I stayed with the idea that begged for an answer. What was triumphant about Jesus' entry into Jerusalem? Thursday evening, as the retreat moved into its final stage, I found myself in a very different space than I had been a few days earlier. We were still quiet, but now the silence culminated in a foot washing ceremony. If you've ever had a foot washing in the right setting, it can be one of the most profound experiences of your life, because it is a tender moment, a humbling moment, a time of reflection, when you are very vulnerable. They washed feet in the Holy Land after people had come to a home, for example, as a sign of hospitality, because in those days the roads were dusty and you wore sandals and your feet, maybe you were barefoot and you were tired and you sat down and the person would come and would wash your feet. Jesus washed the feet of his disciples, John says. This is one of the last acts that Jesus performed before he was arrested and taken away. You know, this is really an interesting piece too. Out of all of the doctrinal problems that the people who have followed Jesus have had over the centuries, there's one thing over which there has been no argument: foot washing.